the mystery of the 12 tribes. Close your eyes and let the sands of time drift slowly beneath your feet. The stars above you shine as they did thousands of years ago, silent witnesses to the lives of men and women whose stories echo across millennia. Among the great mysteries of the ancient world is one tale that has fascinated historians, theologians, and seekers of wisdom alike: the story of the 12 tribes of Israel. Who were they? Were they merely the children of a wandering patriarch named Jacob, later called Israel, or something more, a people chosen to carry a promise across centuries of hardship? What became of them? Did they fade into dust, forgotten among the ruins of fallen kingdoms? Or do their descendants walk among us even now, their heritage hidden but alive? The story of the 12 tribes is not simply a tale of ancient bloodlines. It is a story of faith and survival, of families and kingdoms, of prophecies and exiles. It is a story of a people who, against all odds, endured centuries of conquest, dispersal, and oppression, yet never lost their sense of identity. The tribes of Israel were not just clans tied by kinship. They were the foundation stones of a nation, a living memory carried in scripture and song, a story across history and legend. To tell this tale, we must walk a path that winds through both history and legend, for much of what we know comes from the sacred texts of the Hebrew Bible, filled with visions, miracles, and prophecies. But alongside these stories, archaeology and the chronicles of neighboring empires, Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian, give us glimpses of the world in which these people lived. Together, faith and history weave a tapestry both fragile and strong, inviting us to listen with open hearts. In this story, you will hear of patriarchs and prophets, kings and conquerors. You will walk the deserts of Canaan, the bustling courts of Pharaoh, the high walls of Jerusalem, and the distant lands where exiled tribes vanished into history. You will hear of promises made beneath the desert sky, of kingdoms rising in glory, and of defeats that nearly erased a people. And at every step you will be reminded that the 12 tribes of Israel are not only a story of the past, but also a mystery that lingers into the present, the land at the crossroads of civilizations. The tale begins in a land called Canaan, a strip of earth lying between the Mediterranean Sea and the desert, between the great powers of Egypt to the south and Mesopotamia to the east. This was no quiet land. Canaan was a crossroads of continents, a place where merchants, armies, and pilgrims passed between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Caravans brought spices, gold, and silk. Soldiers brought steel, fire, and conquest. Kingdoms rose and fell here, each leaving its mark upon the soil. For the small peoples who lived in Canaan, life was both a blessing and a curse. Fertile valleys and trade routes brought prosperity, but wars and invasions brought suffering. It was here, in this turbulent yet promising land, that the ancestors of the Israelites settled, herding flocks, tilling fields, and building their first altars to their God. The promise of God. At the heart of the story lies a covenant, a sacred agreement between God and a man named Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelites. God's voice, according to the scriptures, promised him land descendants as numerous as the stars and a destiny to bless all nations. Abraham's son Isaac carried the covenant forward, and Isaac's son Jacob, renamed Israel after wrestling with the divine, became the father of 12 sons. From these 12 sons, 12 tribes would grow. These tribes were not simply families, they became nations within a nation. Each tribe carried its own character, its own lands, its own destiny. Together they formed the backbone of ancient Israel. Yet as prophecy foretold, they would one day be divided, some preserved, some scattered, some lost to time. The enduring question. The story of the 12 tribes is a tale of resilience. Few peoples in history have endured such exile and dispersal, yet still remembered their name and faith. The Babylonians sought to erase them, the Assyrians scattered them, the Romans shattered their nation, and yet the Jewish people remain. But what of the tribes themselves? Judah and Benjamin became the ancestors of the Jewish people as we know them today. Levi, the priestly tribe, lives on in the memory of temple worship. But the other 10, the tribes of Reuben, Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Ephraim, and Manasseh, disappeared after the Assyrian conquest in 722 BC. Some say they were absorbed by neighboring peoples. Others believe they wandered into distant lands, leaving echoes in places as far as Ethiopia, India, and even beyond the mountains of Central Asia. These 10 tribes became a legend, the lost tribes of Israel. Why their story matters. Why does this story still matter after so many centuries? Because it is not merely the tale of one ancient nation, it is the tale of identity itself. Every people, every culture seeks to know where it came from. For Israel, the story of the 12 tribes is a foundation myth, a memory that bound generations together, even in exile. For others, it is a mystery, an unsolved puzzle about where those lost tribes went and whether their blood still flows in forgotten corners of the world. Above all, the story of the 12 tribes is a tale of survival. In their triumphs and failures, in their unity and their scattering, they remind us that history is not only written in stone monuments and royal decrees, but also in faith, memory, and story passed down across generations. A journey begins. So as you listen now, let the noise of the modern world fade. Picture yourself by a campfire under desert stars as travelers and shepherds once told stories long into the night. Hear the voice of history whispering of Abraham and Jacob, of tribes and kingdoms, of exile and return. For this is the beginning of the story of the 12 tribes of Israel, a story of promise, loss, and enduring hope. Abraham and the covenant. The story of the 12 tribes begins even earlier than Jacob, with a man named Abraham. To understand the tribes, you must first walk with him across the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, through caravan trails that led toward a land both dangerous and promising. For it was with Abraham that the covenant was made, a promise that would shape the destiny of his descendants forever. The ancient world of Abraham. The world around 1800 BC, during what historians call the Middle Bronze Age, was a place of great kingdoms and restless migrations. To the east in Mesopotamia, city-states like Uruk and Babylon thrived along the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. To the west along the Nile, Egypt was entering its middle kingdom, a time of centralized rule after centuries of division. Between these empires lay the narrow land of Canaan, the bridge between continents where small city-states clung to independence under the looming shadow of greater powers. It was a land of hills and valleys, deserts and fertile plains, of walled towns, caravan markets and shrines to many gods. Canaan's people, Amorites, Hittites, Philistines, and others worshipped a host of deities tied to fertility, storms, and war. The great god El, the storm god Baal, and the goddess Asherah were among the most revered. Into this world, Abraham's voice of monotheism rang as something radically new, one God unseen but all-powerful ruler, not of one land, but of the universe. From Ur to Canaan, the scriptures say Abraham's journey began in Ur in southern Mesopotamia, though some traditions place his origins further north in Haran, a caravan city in modern-day Turkey. Wherever his beginning, Abraham became known as the one who heard the voice of God, a call to leave behind homeland and kin, and to journey toward a land that would be shown to him. This land was Canaan, a fertile strip of earth beside the sea. God's words to Abraham are remembered. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars of the heavens and as the sand on the seashore. This land I give to you and to your children forever. It was not just a promise of land, it was the birth of a destiny, the covenant. In the stillness of night beneath the glittering sky, Abraham is said to have stood in awe as God spoke of a covenant. This covenant was no ordinary agreement. It was a sacred pact binding God to Abraham and Abraham's descendants. Abraham would worship no other gods, and in return, God would protect his family, multiply his descendants, and grant them the land of Canaan as their inheritance. The covenant was sealed with symbols, sacrifices of animals, rituals of devotion, and later the act of circumcision, marking Abraham's household as bound to this God forever. From this moment, Abraham was no longer merely a wandering shepherd. He became the father of nations. The promise tested. But promises are not without trials. Abraham and his wife Sarah were old beyond the years of childbearing. Yet the covenant spoke of descendants as numerous as the stars. How could this be? The years passed, doubts grew, and Abraham's faith was tested again and again. At last, in their old age, Sarah gave birth to a son, Isaac. This child was more than a boy. He was a living sign that God's word was true. Isaac would inherit the covenant, and through him the tribes would one day be born. But the covenant was tested once more in the story of the binding of Isaac. Abraham, commanded to offer his son as sacrifice, journeyed with Isaac to a mountain. At the last moment, an angel stayed his hand, and a ram was offered instead. To later generations, this story became a symbol of faith's ultimate test, an image of trusting God even in the face of unthinkable loss. Abraham's world. To understand Abraham's life, we must also understand the world around him. The land of Canaan, though promised, was already inhabited by other peoples. City-states like Jericho and Hazor flourished. Egyptian records show that Canaan was often under Egypt's influence, serving as both a buffer zone and a trade corridor. Abraham would have encountered Amorite clans, merchant caravans from Mesopotamia, and Egyptian officials collecting tribute. His world was one of shifting alliances and fragile settlements where nomadic herders like himself wandered with flocks and tents, moving where grass and water could be found. But Abraham's vision was not of temporary camps. It was of a lasting homeland, a future that stretched beyond his own lifetime. Faith in the unknown. Imagine Abraham standing at night in the silent desert. The winds move across the sand and the sky burns with stars. Around him are the idols of the nation's gods of wood and stone. Yet Abraham clings to a different voice, the unseen God, who promises eternity. This act of faith, of trusting in a destiny that could not yet be seen, became the foundation not only of the Israelite tribes, but of three great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For all trace their roots back to Abraham, the wanderer who believed, the beginning of a people. So the story begins not with 12 tribes, but with one man, one promise, and one covenant. Abraham's life stretched like a shadow into the future. Through Isaac, the covenant continued. Through Jacob, it multiplied. And through Jacob's 12 sons, the tribes would be born. In Abraham's time, it was only a whisper, a promise carried on the desert wind. Yet that whisper would one day become a nation, a kingdom, and a legend. The 12 tribes of Israel would rise and fall, be scattered and remembered, and even in loss their story would not end. A bedtime reflection. As you let this story rest in your mind, imagine yourself walking beside Abraham on his long journey. The road is uncertain, the lands are strange, and yet a light of promise guides him onward. He does not see the tribes yet. He does not see the temple or the kingdom. He only knows that God has spoken, and that is enough. The tribes of Israel are not yet born, but their destiny has already been written in the stars. Jacob renamed Israel. The story of the 12 tribes draws closer now. Abraham's covenant passed to his son Isaac, and from Isaac to his twin sons Esau and Jacob. The tale of these brothers is one of rivalry, destiny, and transformation. It is Jacob, later renamed Israel, whose 12 sons would become the founders of the tribes, the world of Jacob. Jacob's life unfolds in the centuries between 1800 and 1600 BC, a time when Canaan was not yet a single kingdom, but a patchwork of walled towns and fields. The land lay caught between two great powers, Egypt to the south and Mesopotamia to the east. Both empires coveted Canaan for its trade routes and fertile valleys. This was a restless age. Nomadic families like Jacob's moved with flocks across hills and plains, sometimes welcomed, sometimes resisted by settled peoples. Local shrines dedicated to gods like Baal El and Asherah dotted the landscape. Religion was everywhere, a blending of sacrifices, altars, and sacred stones. Yet within this world of many gods, Jacob's family clung to the faith of his father and grandfather, the covenant with the one unseen God. The rivalry of brothers. Isaac and his wife Rebekah bore twin sons. Esau the elder was strong, a hunter of the fields. Jacob the younger was quiet, dwelling among the tents. In their culture, the eldest son would inherit the father's blessing, the birthright. Yet through cunning and chance, Jacob took what might have belonged to Esau. The scriptures tell of Esau returning, famished, from the fields, selling his birthright for a bowl of stew. Later, Jacob disguised himself to receive Isaac's blessing, deceiving both father and brother. These stories paint Jacob as clever, but also restless, yearning for the destiny promised to him. The journey to Peniel. Jacob's life was not easy. Fleeing his brother's anger, he lived for 20 years in the household of his uncle Laban. There, he married Leah and Rachel, and through them and their maidservants, he fathered 12 sons and 1 daughter. His household grew, his flocks multiplied, but his heart longed to return to the land of his fathers. It was on this journey home that Jacob faced a night unlike any other. Alone by the river Jabbok, he wrestled with a mysterious figure. Some say a man, others an angel, and some believe it was God himself. They struggled until dawn, and Jacob, though wounded, refused to release his opponent without a blessing. In that moment he was given a new name, Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. This was more than a new name, it was a transformation. Jacob was no longer the deceiver, the restless wanderer. He was Israel, father of a nation, famine in the land. But the times grew harsh. Around the 17th century, BC drought and famine swept through Canaan. Such famines were common in a land dependent on seasonal rains, and when the land failed, families sought survival elsewhere. Egypt, nourished by the Nile's floodwaters, became a refuge. So Jacob, with his family of about 70 souls, migrated into Egypt. What was meant to be a temporary stay became a 4-century sojourn. There, in the fertile region of Goshen, Jacob's sons and their descendants multiplied, shifting from nomadic herdsmen to a settled agricultural people. At first they prospered under Egypt's favor, especially through the legacy of Joseph, Jacob's beloved son, who had risen to high office in Pharaoh's court. But times changed. New kings feared the growing Hebrew population. Suspicion turned to oppression. The children of Israel were enslaved, forced into hard labor for the glory of Egypt's monuments. The sons of Jacob, each of Jacob's 12 sons, became the father of a tribe: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, would later be counted as tribes in their own right, ensuring that the number of tribal inheritances remained 12. These sons were not perfect men. Their stories are filled with rivalry and betrayal, loyalty and redemption. They quarreled, they conspired, and yet from their lineages entire tribes would grow. The tribe of Levi would give priests and guardians of the temple. Judah would produce kings including David and Solomon. Joseph's descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh, would lead the northern tribes, Egypt and the great powers. To place this in its historical frame, Egypt during Jacob's time was in transition. The great pyramids of the Old Kingdom already stood as ancient monuments. The Middle Kingdom flourished around 1700 BC, with its capital at Thebes uniting Upper and Lower Egypt once more. But by 1650 BC, Egypt would face invasions by the Hyksos foreign rulers, who themselves may have had Semitic roots. For the Israelites, Egypt was both a place of salvation and of bondage, a shelter from famine, but later a house of slavery. This dual role would echo through all their history, Egypt as both refuge and oppressor. The meaning of exile. The exile in Egypt became one of the defining experiences of Israel's identity. Here the 12 sons grew into 12 tribes. Here they shifted from a single family into a people numbering thousands. Yet here too they faced oppression that would one day call forth a deliverer, Moses, and the great Exodus. Jacob's life ended in Egypt, but his story stretched far beyond his own years. His new name, Israel, became the name of his people. His sons became tribes, and his descendants would carry his story through generations of wandering conquest and exile. Reflection at nightfall. Imagine Jacob by the river that night, wrestling until dawn. He is tired, wounded, yet unwilling to let go. His struggle is our struggle to seek blessing in the midst of hardship, to hold on to hope even when uncertain. His new name, Israel, the one who strives with God, would forever define his people. The 12 tribes began not in triumph, but in struggle. A man wrestling in the night, a family fleeing famine, a people entering exile. Yet from these beginnings would rise a story that shaped the world, history of prophecy and faith. The tribes of Israel were not merely families of flesh and blood. They were born in prophecy, carried by faith, and shaped by a covenant that stretched far beyond the lives of their ancestors. To understand their origin is to step into a world where the boundary between history and divine promise was thin, where dreams and visions guided the steps of men, and where faith became the foundation of a nation. Prophecy in the ancient world, in the lands of Canaan and Mesopotamia, prophecy was not unusual. Every great people believed that their God spoke through seers, oracles, and signs in the heavens. Kings sought omens before battles, priests read the movements of the stars, and diviners listened to whispers in sacred groves. But the prophets of Israel were different. They did not speak to please kings or promise riches. They spoke with the voice of one God, the unseen Creator, whose covenant with Abraham demanded loyalty and justice. To this God, sacrifices were not enough if the people abandoned righteousness. Idolatry, oppression, and violence would bring ruin, while faithfulness would bring blessing. The covenant renewed. The first great prophecy that defined the tribes was the covenant with Abraham passed down through Isaac and Jacob. It was a promise of land of descendants and of a relationship between God and his chosen people. The words remembered are gentle yet solemn. I will be your God, and you will be my people. This covenant was not only about inheritance, it was about identity. Other nations worshipped many gods of war and harvest, but Israel was bound to one eternal and invisible who demanded moral faithfulness as much as ritual devotion. Jacob's blessings. When Jacob, now called Israel, grew old and neared the end of his days, he gathered his 12 sons. Over each he spoke words remembered in the book of Genesis, blessings, prophecies, and warnings. Each son was given not just an inheritance, but a destiny. Reuben, the firstborn, strong yet unstable, destined to lose his birthright. Simeon and Levi, fierce and violent, whose anger would scatter them among the tribes. Judah, a lion from whose line kings would rise, kings like David, and one day a greater king to come. Joseph, fruitful and wise, who saved his brothers in Egypt. Benjamin, a wolf, fierce in battle. Each prophecy became a thread in the fabric of Israel's story, shaping the character of the tribes that would descend from them. The birth of faith. The faith of the Israelites was not born in temples of stone, but in the long wanderings of shepherds beneath the open sky. Abraham built altars of earth and stone wherever he journeyed. Jacob dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven, angels ascending and descending. These moments, simple, personal, and mystical, were the seeds of a faith that would one day transform nations. This faith was radical. In a world of many gods tied to lands and rivers, Israel's God was not confined to a single place. He was the Lord of heaven and earth, a God who traveled with his people, who guided them in dreams, who could be worshipped not only in temples, but wherever they pitched their tents. The prophets' warnings. As the tribes grew, prophets arose among them. Their voices carried both warning and hope. They warned that if Israel abandoned justice and turned to idols, calamity would follow. And indeed, history bore this out when the tribes' strayed enemies rose against them, Assyrians, Babylonians, and others. Yet even in exile, prophecy never ceased. Prophets reminded the people that though punished, they were not forsaken. The covenant was eternal. One day the scattered tribes would be gathered again. One day peace would be restored. Historical echoes. Outside of Scripture, historians and archaeologists traced the rise of early Israel to the highlands of Canaan around the 13th century BC. Small villages, pottery styles, and new forms of worship appear in the archaeological record. While the biblical stories speak of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as individuals, history shows us a people slowly forming their unique identity amidst larger empires. Egyptian records even mention a people called Habiru or Apiru, wandering groups of outsiders and laborers. Some scholars believe these could be early Hebrews known not by kings or palaces but as migrants and shepherds living on the margins of great powers. The promise of the land. Central to prophecy was always the land. The promised land, Canaan, was not just soil and stone. It was the physical sign of the covenant. To dwell in it was to be blessed. To lose it through exile was to be judged. For the tribes, the land was both home and symbol proof that God had kept his word to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Faith in exile. The most enduring test of Israel's faith would come later in exile, for when the tribes were scattered, when the temple was destroyed, and when foreign gods seemed to triumph, the people could have abandoned hope. Yet prophecy reminded them that exile was not the end. Their God was not bound to a single temple or mountain. He was with them in Babylon, in Assyria, in Egypt. This idea that God traveled with his people was the heart of their survival. It kept their faith alive even when kingdoms fell. A whisper beneath the stars. So when you think of the 12 tribes, do not see only families or warriors. See a people bound by prophecy, guided by faith, carrying an invisible promise across deserts and centuries. Their story begins with shepherds, altars, and dreams. It grows through blessings spoken by patriarchs and through prophets who dared to tell kings the truth.
It is a story of faith that endures exile, of promises that outlast ruin, and of a covenant whispered beneath the desert stars. Abraham's family and the birth of the tribes. The covenant that began with Abraham flowed like a river through generations. First to Isaac, the son of promise, then to Jacob, the struggler who became Israel. Now through Jacob's family, the covenant would spread outward, branching into 12 tribes that would one day inherit the promised land. This is not merely the story of individuals, but of a family whose joys, rivalries, betrayals, and blessings shape the destiny of a people. Each of Jacob's sons would become the ancestor of a tribe, and together they would form the nation of Israel. Isaac and the fulfillment of the promise. Isaac's birth was itself a miracle. Abraham and Sarah were old far past the years of childbearing, yet God had promised descendants, and against all odds, Sarah bore a son. Isaac was not only Abraham's child, but a sign that God's covenant was real, not merely words on the wind. Isaac grew to marry Rebekah, a woman of beauty and strength. Together they had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau the elder became a hunter, wild and free. Jacob was quieter, dwelling in tents, clever and watchful. Yet it was Jacob who would carry the covenant forward, though not without struggle. Jacob's wives and household. Jacob's life was marked by both labor and love. Working for his uncle Laban in Mesopotamia, he toiled for 20 years. He married 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel, and through them and their maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah. Jacob fathered 12 sons and 1 daughter. It was not an easy household. Rivalries between the wives, jealousies among the children, and favoritism shown by Jacob made for a family filled with tension. Yet out of this complicated web of relationships would emerge the foundation of Israel itself, the 12 sons of Jacob. Each son became the ancestor of a tribe, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn by Leah. Strong but unstable, his actions cost him the rights of the eldest. Simeon and Levi, fierce brothers, known for their violence at Shechem, later scattered among Israel. Judah, from Leah, destined for leadership. From Judah's line would come kings David and Solomon. Issachar, Leah's son, remembered as strong and hardworking, a symbol of endurance. Zebulun, also Leah's son, associated with seafaring and commerce. Dan, son of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, destined to judge his people. Naphtali, also Bilhah's son, remembered as swift and free. Gad, son of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, a tribe of warriors. Asher, Zilpah's second son, associated with prosperity and abundance. Joseph, Rachel's beloved son, sold by his brothers into Egypt, but rising to great power. His line would split into two tribes named for his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. Benjamin, Rachel's youngest born, in sorrow as she died in childbirth. Fierce and brave, his tribe would remain close to Judah. Though Dinah, Jacob's daughter, is remembered in Scripture, the tribes traced their lineage through these 12 sons. Rivalry and reconciliation. The sons of Jacob were not united in peace. They quarreled often, most famously when jealousy drove them to sell Joseph into slavery in Egypt. Yet even betrayal was turned to destiny. Joseph rose to become Pharaoh's trusted advisor, and in a time of famine he brought salvation to his family. This moment carried deep meaning. Out of jealousy came deliverance. Out of exile came survival. The tribes would always carry this paradox: divided yet bound together, flawed yet chosen. Prophecies of Jacob. Before his death, Jacob blessed his sons in a scene that has echoed for generations. His words were more than farewells. They were prophecies shaping the destiny of each tribe. Judah was promised the scepter, a line of kings. Joseph was blessed with fruitfulness and strength. Levi, though scattered, would one day hold the priesthood. Others were spoken of in symbols of animals, tools, and traits, signs of their future roles. These blessings were not mere poetry. They became the way Israel understood itself, a family identity rooted in words passed from father to sons. The tribes in Egypt. Jacob's 12 sons settled with their families in the fertile region of Goshen in the Nile Delta. Egypt, with its overflowing river, became their refuge from famine. There they multiplied, transforming from a family of 70 into a people numbering thousands. At first, they were welcome honored for Joseph's service, but time passed and new pharaohs arose who did not remember Joseph. The Hebrews became too numerous, too strong in Egyptian eyes. Suspicion turned to fear, and fear hardened into oppression. The Israelites were enslaved, forced into labor-building cities and monuments for Pharaoh. Here, in the crucible of suffering, the identity of the tribes was forged. They were no longer just Jacob's children, they were the people of Israel. The meaning of the tribes, the 12 tribes, were more than genealogical lines. They became symbols of unity in diversity, each with its own character, each holding part of the covenant. Together they represented the fullness of Israel. In later centuries, when they entered the promised land, each tribe would receive its own territory except for Levi, who would serve as priests. Yet even in their separateness they were bound by one God, one law, one covenant. Reflection at nightfall. Imagine Jacob, old and weary, laying his hands upon the heads of his sons. Around him the flickering light of oil lamps, the murmur of his household, the faces of 12 sons destined to carry his name. He knows their flaws, their jealousies, their sins, yet he sees beyond them. He sees tribes, generations, a nation that will rise and fall, wander and return. From this family, fragile and flawed, the 12 tribes of Israel are born, and though centuries of exile and conquest lie ahead, Their names will not be forgotten. The meaning of the 12 names. Names in the ancient world carried weight far beyond simple labels. To name a child was to speak over them a hope, a memory, or a destiny. The names of Jacob's 12 sons, given by their mothers in moments of longing, joy, or sorrow, would echo down through centuries. Each name carried not only the story of a birth, but the seed of a tribe's future. Close your eyes and imagine each child born beneath the desert sky, wrapped in swaddling cloths placed in their mother's arms. With each cry of life came a name, a word woven with meaning, a word that would one day become the name of a tribe. Reuben, behold a son, born to Leah, Jacob's first wife. Reuben's name is filled with Leah's yearning, look a son. For Leah unloved compared to her sister Rachel, the birth of Reuben was proof that God had heard her sorrow. His name was a cry of joy, but also of hope that her husband might love her more. Reuben would later falter, losing his birthright, yet his tribe carried the dignity of being the firstborn of Israel. Simeon, God has heard. Leah's second son, Simeon's name, means God has heard. Leah gave thanks that her prayers had been answered, that she had borne another son. Simeon's tribe would later be fierce and scattered, but his name was rooted in the idea of a God who listens to human cries. Levi, attached or joined. Levi's name speaks of connection. Now my husband will be joined to me, for I have borne him 3 sons. Though Leah's hope for Jacob's love was not fulfilled, Levi's descendants would become attached to God himself. The Levites became the priestly tribe, guardians of the temple, their inheritance not land but service. Judah, praise. When Judah was born, Leah's heart turned to gratitude. This time I will praise the Lord. From Judah's line would come kings, and in later tradition, the Messiah. Judah's name became synonymous with leadership, and from it the word Jew would one day be derived. His tribe would endure when others were scattered. Dan, judge Rachel, unable to bear children, gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob. Dan, born of Bilhah, was named God has judged me, and he has vindicated me. His name spoke of justice and balance. The tribe of Dan would later be known for warriors, but also for idolatry, a mixture of judgment and downfall. Naphtali, my struggle. Also born of Bilhah, Naphtali's name means my struggle or wrestling. Rachel declared, I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed. His name reflected rivalry, but also resilience. Naphtali's tribe would later dwell in the fertile northern lands, swift as deer upon the hills. Gad, good fortune. Leah too gave her maid Zilpah to Jacob. Gad's name means good fortune has come. The tribe of Gad would settle east of the Jordan, strong warriors who stood as a shield for Israel's frontiers. His name carried the sound of blessing of abundance brought by fate. Asher, happy or blessed, Zilpah's second son Asher was named in joy. How happy I am, the women will call me blessed. Asher's tribe would inherit fertile lands, rich with olive groves and vineyards. Prosperity and joy marked their name, a reminder of delight, even in hardship. Issachar, reward or wages. When Issachar was born, Leah said, God has rewarded me. His name reflected the sense of gift of something earned through faithfulness. Issachar's tribe would be known for labor and wisdom, a quiet strength in the fields of Israel. Zebulun, dwelling or honor, Leah's 6th son was named Zebulun. Now my husband will honor me. His tribe would one day dwell by the sea, known for trade and ships. His name spoke of home and honor of stability long desired. Joseph, he will add. Finally, Rachel, long barren, gave birth to a son of her own. She named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." Joseph's name was Hope for More, and indeed Rachel would later bear Benjamin. Joseph's destiny was great. Betrayed by his brothers, he rose to power in Egypt, saving many from famine. His two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, would themselves become tribes, ensuring Joseph's line was doubled. Benjamin, son of the right hand. Rachel's second son came with sorrow. As she died in childbirth, she named him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Jacob called him Benjamin, son of the right hand. His name became one of power, favor, and resilience. His tribe would remain loyal to Judah, forming the core of the kingdom that survived exile. Names as destiny. Each name carried a story of hope, rivalry, blessing, or grief. Together they reflected the struggles of a family, loved and unloved wives, barren mothers, rival sisters. And yet out of these tangled human stories came the tribes of Israel. In later centuries, these names would be carved into the breastplate of the high priest, each gem representing a tribe shining before God in the temple. Their names were remembered in songs, psalms, and prophecies, each one a thread in the fabric of Israel's destiny. Reflection at nightfall. As you hear these names whispered, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, let them fall upon your ears like ancient music. Each is more than a word, each is a memory, a hope, a story passed down through generations. These names, spoken by mothers in the quiet of tents, became the names of tribes, the pillars of a nation, and even now, thousands of years later, they are still remembered, still spoken, still alive. The amazing prophecies about the 12 tribes of Israel. The story of the 12 tribes is not only one of births and names of families and migrations, it is also a story written in the voices of prophets, men who spoke as if fire burned in their bones, who saw beyond the present moment into the mysteries of the future. Their words were warnings, their visions were promises, their voices were the conscience of Israel. The prophets spoke of kings and kingdoms, of exile and return, of judgment and redemption. They looked upon the 12 tribes not only as families, but as a nation bound by covenant, and their prophecies shaped how Israel understood its destiny. The prophets as watchmen. In the ancient Near East, prophets were often attached to royal courts, giving omens or blessings before battle. But the prophets of Israel were different. They stood apart, unafraid to rebuke kings, priests, and people alike. They were, as Scripture says, watchmen on the walls, crying out when danger approached. Their role was not only to warn of armies or famine, but to remind the tribes of the covenant. If Israel was faithful to God, they would prosper in their land. If they turned to idols and injustice, they would be scattered. This theme became the rhythm of prophecy, warning, judgment, and hope, Jacob's final words. The first prophetic words over the tribes came not from a prophet in the wilderness, but from Jacob himself. On his deathbed in Egypt, he gathered his 12 sons and spoke blessings that were also prophecies. Judah was promised a scepter, a line of kings. Joseph was told he would be fruitful and strong. Others were warned of weakness or scattering. These words shaped how later generations understood their own destinies. Moses and the tribes centuries later, as the tribes prepared to enter the promised land, Moses, the great deliverer, also spoke blessings over them. he described their lands, their strengths, and their roles. To Levi he gave the priesthood. To Judah he gave leadership. To Joseph he promised abundance. These blessings were more than farewell words. They were a map of identity. They reminded each tribe of its place in the tapestry of Israel, the prophets of the kingdom. When the 12 tribes were united under kings like David and Solomon, the prophets often spoke words of guidance and encouragement. Nathan rebuked David for his sins, but also promised that his dynasty would endure. Later, when the kingdom split into north and south, prophets like Elijah and Elisha rose to challenge idolatry in the northern kingdom, calling Israel back to the worship of the one true God. They warned that if the tribes abandoned the covenant, destruction would come. Yet, even in warning, they spoke of a time of restoration when God would gather the scattered tribes once more. Warnings of exile. By the 8th century BC, the prophets' voices grew urgent. Amos thundered against injustice in the northern kingdom. Hosea spoke of God's love for Israel as that of a husband for a faithless wife. Isaiah warned Judah of coming judgment, yet promised that a remnant would remain. When Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom in 722 BC, carrying away the 10 tribes, the prophets' warnings were fulfilled. Yet they still spoke of hope that one day the tribes would be gathered from the corners of the earth. In Babylon's shadow. After the southern kingdom fell to Babylon in 586 BC, prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel continued to speak. Jeremiah wept over the destruction of Jerusalem, yet promised a new covenant written on the hearts of the people. Ezekiel saw visions of dry bones rising to life, a prophecy of Israel's restoration. These prophecies became lifelines for a people in exile. They reminded the tribes that their story was not over even when their temple lay in ruins and their land was lost. The hope of gathering. One of the most powerful themes in prophecy is the vision of gathering. Time and again the prophets spoke of a day when God would bring back the scattered tribes. I will gather them from the north and from the south, from the east and from the west, the words echo. This hope kept the people alive during exile, reminding them that their dispersion was not the end. Some traditions held that even the 10 lost tribes carried away by Assyria would one day be restored. Legends grew of hidden peoples beyond rivers and mountains waiting to return. The prophet's words kept this mystery alive. The meaning of prophecy. For the 12 tribes, prophecy was never merely about predicting the future. It was about calling the people back to their true identity. It was about reminding them that they were chosen not for privilege, but for faithfulness and justice. When the tribes listened, they prospered. When they ignored the prophets, disaster followed. Yet always prophecy ended in hope that God's covenant was unbroken, that his promises still stood, and that Israel's destiny was not finished. Reflection at nightfall. Imagine yourself by the walls of Jerusalem long ago, the night before an enemy army arrives. The people are fearful, the priests burn incense in the temple, and the king paces in his palace. Then a prophet walks into the city square. His voice is strong yet sorrowful. He tells the people they have strayed. He warns of destruction, yet then he lifts his eyes and speaks of a future day when God will gather his people again. This is the rhythm of prophecy: sorrow and hope, exile and return, judgment and mercy. It is the heartbeat of the story of the 12 tribes, the rise of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes, once only a family in Egypt, became a people through hardship. After centuries of bondage, they rose in defiance under Moses, crossing deserts and rivers, guided by prophecy and law. And in time, under Joshua, they entered the land long promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land of Canaan. This was the beginning of their rise from wandering clans to a confederation of tribes, and finally to a united kingdom under Kings David and Solomon, the entry into the Promised Land. Around the late 13th or early 12th century BC, according to biblical tradition, the tribes crossed the Jordan River under Joshua's leadership. Archaeology suggests that during this time new settlements appeared in the highlands of Canaan, small villages, pottery styles, and altars that hint at a new people carving out a place for themselves. Each tribe received an inheritance of land, Judah in the south with its rugged hills, Ephraim and Manasseh in the central highlands, Reuben, Gad, and part of Manasseh across the Jordan, Zebulun, Issachar, Naphtali, and Asher in the fertile north, Dan near the coast, though later pushed inland, Benjamin nestled between Judah and Ephraim. The tribe of Levi was scattered, serving as priests and guardians of the tabernacle. This division gave each tribe its place, yet together they formed a loose confederation bound by shared worship of the God of Israel. The age of the judges. For generations Israel had no king. Each tribe lived in its own land, facing enemies on its borders, Philistines on the coast, Moabites to the east, Canaanite city-states still resisting within. When danger threatened, leaders arose called judges to rally the tribes. Figures like Deborah, Gideon, and Samson became heroes of this era, reminding the people that their strength lay not in armies alone, but in faithfulness to their God. Yet the tribes were often divided, quarreling among themselves. Without unity they were vulnerable. And so in time they cried out for a king. The first king was Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. He united the tribes for a time, leading them against the Philistines. But Saul's reign was troubled, his heart divided. His fall cleared the way for David from the tribe of Judah. David was more than a warrior. He was a poet, a shepherd, a leader after God's own heart. Around 1000 BC, David united the tribes into a single kingdom. He captured Jerusalem, making it his capital, a city not belonging to any one tribe, but to all Israel. There he brought the Ark of the Covenant, making Jerusalem both political and spiritual center. Under David, Israel was strong. The tribes, once scattered and quarrelsome, found unity in his leadership. His psalms became songs of the nation, sung in fields and temples alike. Solomon and the Temple. David's son Solomon inherited the throne around 970 BC. Where David had been a man of war, Solomon was a builder and a man of peace. His reign saw trade with Phoenicia, alliances with Egypt, and wealth flowing into Israel. His greatest achievement was the building of the temple in Jerusalem, begun around 960 BC. It was a house of stone and cedar, overlaid with gold, filled with carvings of cherubim and palm trees. For the tribes, the temple was the heart of their faith, a permanent dwelling for the God who had traveled with them in tents and tabernacles. At its dedication, the priests sang and the people bowed, believing that God's presence filled the Holy of Holies. The temple became the symbol of Israel's unity, its glory, and its covenant. The Golden Age. Under David and Solomon, the 12 tribes reached their zenith. Trade routes passed through their land, bringing spices from Arabia, gold from Ophir, and cedar from Lebanon. Stories of Solomon's wisdom spread to distant courts, drawing visitors like the Queen of Sheba. This was the golden memory of Israel, a time when the tribes were united their land, secure their temple, standing their kings wise and strong. Later generations, scattered and exiled, would look back to this era with longing, seeds of division. Yet beneath the splendor cracks began to show. Heavy taxation forced labor for Solomon's building projects, and rivalries between the northern tribes and Judah sowed seeds of discontent. When Solomon died, the fragile unity broke. The 10 northern tribes, led by Ephraim and Manasseh, rebelled and formed their own kingdom, still called Israel, with Samaria as its capital. The southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin with the Levites, remained loyal to David's house, forming the Kingdom of Judah with Jerusalem as its center. The United Kingdom, glorious for a brief time, was now divided, brother against brother, tribes against tribes. Reflection at nightfall. Picture the tribes in their glory, pilgrims climbing the hills to Jerusalem, voices rising in psalms, farmers tending vineyards in Issachar, ships sailing from Zebulun's coast, shepherds driving flocks in Judah. It was a land alive with promise. Yet also imagine the shadows gathering, rivalries, stirring kings, faltering foreign empires watching with hungry eyes. The rise of the tribes was glorious but fragile. What was built in unity could be broken in division. The 12 tribes had risen from shepherds and slaves to kings and temples. They had tasted unity and glory. But ahead lay decline, exile, and the mystery of the tribes lost to history. The fall of the 12 tribes of Israel. Every story of rise carries within it the seeds of decline. For the 12 tribes who had once known unity under David and splendor under Solomon, the coming centuries would be marked by division, conquest, and scattering. The tribes that had entered the promised land with such hope now faced enemies too great to resist. And the songs once sung in the Temple of Jerusalem would give way to laments by rivers of exile, a kingdom divided. When Solomon died around 930 BC, his son Rehoboam inherited the throne. But when he demanded heavier burdens from the people, the 10 northern tribes rebelled. They broke away, forming the Kingdom of Israel with Samaria as its capital. Only Judah and Benjamin, along with the priestly Levites, remained loyal to David's line, forming the Kingdom of Judah with Jerusalem at its heart. From that day, Israel was divided north against south, brothers turned into rivals. The prophets warned that such division weakened the covenant people, but their words often went unheeded. The northern kingdom's fate. The northern kingdom, though rich in land and population, was unstable. Its kings rose and fell quickly, and idolatry crept into worship. Prophets like Amos and Hosea thundered against injustice and false gods, warning that destruction would come. In 722 BC the warning was fulfilled. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, ruthless and vast, swept across the land. Samaria was besieged and fell. The people of the 10 northern tribes, Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and Manasseh, were carried into exile. The Assyrians had a policy of forced relocation. Entire populations were scattered across distant provinces while foreigners were resettled in their place. In this scattering, the 10 lost tribes vanished from history. Some may have assimilated among the peoples of Mesopotamia. Others may have wandered further east along trade routes. But as distinct tribes they disappeared. Their fate became one of history's enduring mysteries. The southern kingdom of Judah. The southern kingdom endured longer. Centered in Jerusalem with its temple still standing, Judah carried on the legacy of David's house. Prophets like Isaiah and Micah spoke words of warning, but also of hope, promising that out of Judah would come a ruler to shepherd God's people. Yet Judah, too, faltered. Kings wavered between faithfulness and idolatry. The rising power of Babylon loomed, and in 586 BC, under King Nebuchadnezzar, Jerusalem fell. The city was burned, the temple destroyed, and the people of Judah were carried into exile by the waters of the Euphrates. This was the Babylonian exile, a wound so deep that psalms were written in mourning. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. The first dispersion. For the people of Judah, this was not only a political defeat, but a spiritual crisis. The temple, their link to God's presence, lay in ruins. The land promised to Abraham was lost. The covenant itself seemed broken. But in exile, prophets arose again. Jeremiah spoke of a new covenant, written not on stone, but on hearts. Ezekiel dreamed of dry bones rising to life, a vision of restoration. Even in defeat, the voice of hope did not fade. A tale of two exiles. The two exiles of Israel in 722 BC and of Judah in 586 BC created two very different outcomes. The northern tribes were scattered, their identity dissolved into legend. The southern tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, retained their faith and memory even in Babylon. When Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BC, he allowed the exiles of Judah to return. They rebuilt Jerusalem and raised the Second Temple, a new beginning. From then on, the people became known as Jews after the tribe of Judah. But the 10 northern tribes never returned. Their story ended in silence, leaving behind the haunting mystery of the lost tribes of Israel. The mystery of the 10 lost tribes. For centuries, scholars, explorers, and dreamers have wondered what became of them. Did they merge with Assyrian peoples, leaving no trace? Did they wander into Persia, Afghanistan, or even as far as India and China? Some traditions claim they reached Ethiopia, others that they crossed into Central Asia and became ancestors of nomadic tribes. Wherever they went, their names faded. Yet the memory of them remained alive in Jewish tradition, a hope that one day, in the time of restoration, they would return. The faith that endured. Though the tribes fell, faith endured. In exile, the people of Judah learned to preserve their identity, not through land or temple alone, but through law, memory, and worship of one God. This resilience kept their story alive when kingdoms around them vanished forever. And so the 12 tribes, though broken, were never forgotten. 3 survived in history, 10 were lost to legend, but together they remained a symbol of God's covenant and a mystery that still whispers through time. Reflection at nightfall. Picture the ruins of Jerusalem in smoke, the temple, a blackened shell. Hear the cries of exiles by the waters of Babylon, their harps hung on willow trees. And imagine, too, the silence of the north, where the 10 tribes once dwelled, their homes empty, their names fading into shadow. The fall of the 12 tribes was not only a tragedy of history, it was a turning point, a reminder that glory is fleeting, but memory endures. Even in loss, their story would be told and retold, carried across centuries by prophets, priests, and storytellers. The Jews returned to the land of Judah. Exile is a heavy word. For the tribes of Israel it meant the loss of land, of temple, of freedom. The fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC had left Judah broken, its people scattered by Babylon. Yet even in captivity, the memory of Zion lived on in their hearts. They sang by foreign rivers of the hills of Jerusalem. They whispered to their children the stories of Abraham, Jacob, and the covenant. And when all seemed lost, a door opened a way back to the land of their fathers. Babylon, the years of longing. In Babylon, the exiles were not erased. They were permitted to live, to build houses, to plant gardens. Some rose to positions of influence like Daniel in the king's court. Yet their sorrow was deep. Without the temple, without sacrifice, could they still be the people of God? Prophets answered yes. Jeremiah reminded them to seek peace in the cities where they lived, but also promised that after 70 years, God would bring them home. Ezekiel, by the banks of the Chebar River, saw visions of dry bones rising to life, a people restored by God's breath. These words became light in the darkness, hope in exile. Cyrus the Great. In 539 BC, history shifted. Babylon fell to Cyrus the Great, king of the Persian Empire. Unlike the Assyrians and Babylonians, who scattered and enslaved Cyrus, believed in allowing peoples to return to their lands and worship their own gods. The Cyrus cylinder. An ancient inscription records his policy of restoration. And in the biblical book of Ezra it is written that Cyrus proclaimed, "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem. Whoever belongs to his people, let him go up, and may his God be with him." For the people of Judah, this was a miracle, a pagan king moved by God's hand to send them home. The return to Judah. Caravans of exiles began the long journey westward across desert and mountain back to the land of their ancestors. The land they returned to was not the Jerusalem they remembered. The city lay in ruins. Fields were barren. Neighboring peoples had settled the land in their absence. But the people brought with them determination, faith, and memory. They rebuilt their homes, their walls, and most importantly, their temple. This second temple, completed around 516 BC, was humbler than Solomon's golden house, but to the returning exiles it was no less sacred. Its dedication marked the renewal of their covenant and their identity as the people of God, the survivors of the tribes. By this time, the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi were the ones who had endured. Judah gave the people their name Jews. Benjamin remained loyal beside them. Levi continued to serve as priests and temple workers. The 10 northern tribes exiled by Assyria 2 centuries earlier were gone, their fate a mystery. Yet in prayers and prophecies, the hope of their return lingered. The prophets spoke of a day when all 12 tribes would be gathered again, united once more in the land. A people changed. Exile had changed the Jews. In Babylon, far from their temple, they had learned new ways to preserve faith, gathering in assemblies, reading from the Torah, praying as a community. These practices, begun in exile, would become the foundation of later Jewish worship in synagogues across the world. When they returned, they brought with them not only longing for the past, but resilience for the future. They knew now that God was not confined to one land or one temple. He was with his people wherever they dwelt. The prophets of return. Prophets continued to speak during this time. Haggai and Zechariah encouraged the rebuilding of the temple, promising that its glory would one day surpass even that of Solomon. Ezra and Nehemiah led reforms, calling the people back to the covenant, urging them to keep faith alive in daily life. The message was clear: their survival as a people would not depend on kings or armies, but on faithfulness to God's law and memory of His promises. The significance of return. The return to Judah was more than a historical event. It was a rebirth. Against all odds, a people conquered and exiled did not vanish, but rose again. They rebuilt their sacred city, rededicated their lives, and carried forward the memory of the 12 tribes. Though only 3 tribes remained visible, they carried within them the legacy of all 12. Each festival, each prayer, each reading of the law was an act of remembrance, a way of saying that the covenant was still alive, even if 10 tribes were lost. Reflection at nightfall. Picture the exiles entering the ruined gates of Jerusalem, carrying torches as twilight falls. Stones lie scattered where the temple once stood. Tears fill their eyes as they kneel to kiss the broken earth. Then slowly they begin to build stone upon stone, altar upon altar. Their return was not triumph in the way of empires, but it was something greater, the triumph of faith over despair. The land of Judah lived again. The covenant endured, and the story of the 12 tribes was not yet finished. The legend of the 10 lost tribes. When the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, they scattered its people across the vast stretches of their empire. Cities were emptied, families torn apart, and the 10 northern tribes vanished from their homeland. Judah, Benjamin, and Levi endured, but the others, Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and Manasseh, were never again heard of as distinct peoples. From that time onward, they became known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and their disappearance became one of the great mysteries of history. The Assyrian scattering. The Assyrian Empire stretched from the rivers of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Armenia, from the deserts of Arabia to the coasts of the Mediterranean. Their policy was clear: uproot conquered peoples, scatter them in distant lands, and replace them with others. This broke rebellion and erased identity. For the 10 tribes, this meant dispersal into foreign provinces, perhaps to Media Persia or beyond. With time, their languages shifted, their customs faded, and their names dissolved into the nations around them. But memory of them endured in Jewish hearts, whispered in stories and prayers. One day they will return. Hopes of return. The prophets did not forget them. Ezekiel spoke of 2 sticks, one for Judah, one for Joseph, that God would join into one, a symbol that one day the divided tribes would be united again. Amos declared that God would restore the fortunes of Israel. These promises kept hope alive that the lost tribes were not gone forever, but hidden, waiting for the appointed time. Ancient theories. Even in antiquity, legends grew of where the tribes might have gone. Some believed they lived beyond the river Sambaitian, a mythical torrent said to rage 6 days a week and rest on the Sabbath, guarding their hidden land. Others thought they were scattered in the lands of Media and Persia, surviving in remote valleys. Early Jewish texts imagined them dwelling at the edge of the known world, beyond mountains and rivers none had crossed. The mystery deepened as travelers returned with tales of strange peoples who might be the descendants of Israel. Medieval legends. In the Middle Ages, as explorers pushed into new lands, speculation grew. Some said the tribes were in Arabia or Ethiopia, pointing to Jewish communities there. Others believed they had wandered east along the Silk Road, becoming part of distant nations in Central Asia or even India. One of the most enduring stories was of Prester John, a mythical Christian king said to rule in the East, whose people some thought were connected to the lost tribes. Such tales blended myth, hope, and longing into a powerful vision of hidden brothers waiting to be found. The global search. Later centuries expanded the search even further. As Europeans encountered new peoples in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, some speculated could these be the descendants of the lost tribes. In Ethiopia, the Beta Israel community preserved Jewish customs, leading many to believe they were linked to Dan. In India, groups like the Bnei Menashe traced their heritage back to Manasseh. Even in the Americas, some early settlers believed the indigenous peoples might be connected to the ancient Israelites, their origins woven into biblical imagination. Though most of these claims are not supported by modern history, they reveal how deeply the legend stirred human curiosity. The mystery today. Modern scholarship suggests the lost tribes likely assimilated into the peoples of the Assyrian Empire. Traces of them may remain in small customs, in words, in forgotten traditions buried under centuries of change. Yet the legend endures because it speaks not only of history, but of hope, hope that what was scattered might one day be gathered again, that what was lost might be restored. For Jewish tradition still holds the dream that in the age of redemption the 10 tribes will return, reunited with Judah and Benjamin in the land of Israel. Why the lost tribes matter. The story of the lost tribes is more than a tale of disappearance. It is a reminder of fragility, how quickly nations can vanish, how easily names can fade. But it is also a reminder of memory, how even when history goes silent, stories keep the lost alive. For the Jewish people, the 10 tribes are not only a mystery, but a symbol. They represent exile and loss, but also resilience and hope. Reflection at nightfall. Imagine the northern hills of Israel long ago as Assyrian soldiers marched its people away. Villages, silent fields, abandoned the sound of children's voices fading into the distance. Now imagine centuries later, a traveler on the Silk Road hearing rumors of a hidden people beyond the mountains, a people who keep the Sabbath, a people whose songs sound like echoes of ancient Israel. Whether myth or memory, the lost tribes still call to us. Their voices drift through history like the desert wind, reminding us that some mysteries are meant not to be solved, but to be remembered. Faith without a kingdom. The fall of the 12 tribes could have been the end. Most nations, when scattered, vanish into the currents of history. Their languages fade, their customs dissolve. Their names are remembered only in broken stones or forgotten songs. But the children of Israel did not vanish. Though their kingdoms were destroyed, though their tribes were scattered, though their temple was turned to ashes, they survived. This survival was not because of kings, for their thrones were broken. It was not because of armies, for their warriors were gone. It was because of something quieter, something deeper, faith carried in memory, in prayer, in story. The shape of exile. In Babylon, the exiles from Judah faced a world unlike their own. They walked among foreign temples carved with images of gods they had never known. They lived under rulers who called themselves kings of the universe. Their own holy city lay in ruins. Their temple burned, their sacrifices ended. To many ancient peoples, this would have meant the end of faith. If the gods of Babylon triumphed, then perhaps the God of Judah had been defeated. But the prophets insisted otherwise. No, they declared, our God is not defeated. He is refining us, disciplining us, preparing us. In that foreign land, faith began to take a new form. Without the temple, the people gathered in houses, in courtyards, by riversides. They read the words of Moses, they recited psalms, they taught their children the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In these humble gatherings, the seed of the synagogue was planted. The people of the book. For centuries, Israel had been defined by its land, its temple, its kings. But in exile, these things were gone. What remained were the scrolls. The Torah, the law of Moses, became the center of identity. Reading and teaching the sacred words became a new form of worship. This was something radical in the ancient world. Most nations worshipped through images, sacrifices, and rituals tied to a specific place. But the Jews carried their God with them in words. They discovered that the covenant was portable. Wherever they went, the scrolls could go too. And so slowly, painfully, they became known as the people of the book. Their survival no longer depended on armies or altars, but on memory, discipline, and faith written down. The return under Persia. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC and allowed the exiles to return, not all chose to go. Some stayed in Mesopotamia, beginning what would become one of the longest-lasting Jewish communities outside Israel. Those who returned rebuilt the temple, but it was not the same as Solomon's golden house. It was smaller, less splendid, more fragile. Yet the second temple was still sacred. Sacrifices resumed, priests served, and Jerusalem once again became holy ground. But something had changed. The people no longer relied only on kings and walls. Their true survival was in their covenant and their law. Life under empires. Over the centuries, new empires rose. Persia, Greece, Rome. Each one conquered Judah. Each one threatened its people. Yet the Jews endured. Even when the temple was destroyed again by Rome in 70 AD, the faith did not vanish. Instead, synagogues spread further. Rabbis taught the Torah in every town, and memory was carried across the world. The 12 tribes were broken, yes. 10 were lost to history, and only Judah, Benjamin, and Levi clearly endured. But the spirit of all 12 was preserved in this transformation. The tribes no longer needed land to exist. They no longer needed crowns or thrones. They had become something that no empire could erase. Faith without a kingdom. This was the miracle that even without a kingdom, without a temple, without power, the people of Israel survived. They became a nation, not of armies, but of memory, not of borders, but of stories, not of palaces, but of prayers. Every Sabbath, families gathered around the table, blessing bread and wine, lighting candles. Children learned to recite the Shema Hiah. O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. In every prayer, the memory of the tribes was kept alive. This rhythm, week after week, year after year, century after century, carried them through exile after exile. Rome could scatter them. Persia could rule them. Greece could suppress them, but no empire could take away the words in their hearts. The legacy of exile. Other nations of the ancient Near East disappeared: the Hittites, the Moabites, the Philistines. Their names survive only in archaeology. But the Jews endured. Why? Because of what was born in exile, a faith not tied to one place but to one God, not bound to one throne but written on scrolls, not limited to one land but able to travel across the earth. The 12 tribes were once a kingdom, After exile, they became something else, a people bound not by walls but by covenant. This is how the story continued, even when it should have ended. Reflection at nightfall. Close your eyes and imagine the exiles by the rivers of Babylon. They have no temple, no king, no home. Yet they gather in a circle, a father reciting the stories of Abraham, a mother singing psalms, children listening with wide eyes. This is how faith survived, not in palaces but in homes, not in armies but in families, not in glory but in quiet resilience. Faith without a kingdom became their strength. And because of this, the memory of the 12 tribes lives on, carried across centuries, spoken in every age, remembered tonight in the stillness of your room. The legacy of the 12 tribes. The story of the 12 tribes did not end with their fall. Though their kingdoms were broken and many were scattered, their memory lived on. It lives even now in faith, in tradition, in legend, and in the hearts of those who tell their story. Their legacy is more than history. It is identity, resilience, and hope. This final part brings their journey to rest, weaving together the threads of covenant, exile, and memory, and showing how the 12 tribes shaped not only the people of Israel, but the imagination of the world. A people remembered. Of the 12 tribes, 3 endured in history: Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Judah became the largest and most enduring, giving its name to the Jewish people. Benjamin, though smaller, stood steadfast beside Judah, loyal through centuries of trial. Levi, scattered among all the tribes, carried the priesthood, keeping alive the songs and sacrifices of the temple until the very end. The other 10 were lost, carried away by Assyria, dissolved into distant lands, and yet, though their names faded from census and soil, they were not forgotten. Every time the Torah was read, every time the Psalms were sung, the memory of Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and Manasseh lived on. In synagogues and scriptures their names were kept as pillars of Israel's past. In prophecy and prayer they were still imagined as pillars of its future. The echo of prophecy. The prophets had promised that one day the divided nation would be made whole again. Ezekiel's vision of 2 sticks becoming one, Judah and Joseph reunited, became a symbol of hope. Isaiah spoke of a time when the exiles would return from every direction, gathered from the 4 corners of the earth. Even as centuries passed, this dream lingered, that the lost tribes were not truly gone, but hidden, waiting for the day of return. Some believe they lived beyond mountains or rivers none had crossed. Others imagined them as scattered among nations, carrying fragments of identity, waiting to be revealed at the end of days. This hope became part of the Jewish soul, that history was not only a story of loss, but of restoration. Legends across the world. As time passed, legends of the lost tribes spread across continents. Travelers returned with tales of distant peoples who kept strange customs, communities in Ethiopia who traced descent from Dan, groups in India claiming the blood of Manasseh, tribes in Central Asia thought to be remnants of Israel scattered by Assyria. In the Middle Ages, when European explorers reached new lands, speculation grew wild. Could the tribes have reached Arabia, Persia, even the Americas? Some Christians imagined that the tribes might return before the end of the world, part of the great gathering foretold in Scripture. Though history gives little certainty, the mystery itself became part of their legacy. The story of the lost tribes was not only about geography, It was about the longing to see wholeness again, the desire to believe that nothing is ever truly lost, a symbol for the world. The 12 tribes also became a symbol beyond Judaism. In Christianity, the 12 apostles of Jesus were seen as echoes of the 12 tribes, a sign that the foundation of Israel was being carried into a new covenant. In Islam, the children of Israel are honored as a chosen people, their prophets revered, their tribes remembered in the Quran. In this way, the 12 tribes became a story not just for one people, but for the world. Their memory crossed borders, languages, and faiths, becoming part of the shared heritage of billions. Why they survived. Why, when so many ancient peoples were forgotten, do we still speak of the 12 tribes of Israel? Nations greater in number vanished without trace. Empires mightier in armies crumbled into silence. But the tribes endured in memory because they became more than politics. They became a story carried in scripture, sung in psalms, told in homes, written in scrolls. They endured because their identity was not in palaces or thrones, but in covenant, not in one king, but in one God, not in borders of stone, but in words carved into the heart. This is the true legacy of the tribes, that they show how memory can outlast ruin, how faith can outlast exile, how hope can outlast despair. The eternal names, even now, thousands of years later, their names are spoken. In prayers, in songs, in stories, each name is a whisper of the past, a thread in the tapestry of identity. Reuben, behold a son. Simeon, God has heard. Levi, the priestly line. Judah, praise and kingship. Dan, the judge. Naphtali, the struggle. Gad, the fortunate. Asher, the blessed. Issachar, the reward. Zebulun, the dwelling. Joseph, the fruitful branch. Benjamin, the beloved son. Together they are more than history. They are a memory that has shaped centuries, legacy for all generations. For the Jewish people, the 12 tribes remain the roots of identity, the foundation of a covenant that still endures. For the world, they are a reminder that no story is too old to inspire, no people too scattered to be remembered. The legacy of the tribes is not only that they lived, but that they still live in faith, in hope, in memory. They remind us that nations may rise and fall, but the human spirit carried in story can outlast the strongest empire. Reflection at nightfall. Now, as our story closes, imagine the land of Canaan at twilight. The hills are quiet. The Jordan runs silver in the dusk, and the stars begin to appear above. Somewhere in the silence you can still hear their names, like echoes on the wind. The 12 tribes are gone, yet not gone. Lost, yet not lost. Their story is written in memory, carved in faith, carried through time. It is a story of resilience, sorrow, and hope, an eternal story that still whispers to us tonight. And so as you rest, let their legacy be a gentle reminder what is remembered is never truly lost. The story of the 12 tribes begins in promise and ends in mystery. From the quiet call of Abraham beneath the Mesopotamian sky, to the blessings spoken by Jacob in Egypt, to the glory of David's kingdom and the sorrow of exile, the tribes of Israel shaped a history that still echoes through time. They were shepherds and warriors, priests and kings. They were builders of altars and singers of psalms. They rose together, fell apart, endured slavery, tasted freedom, built kingdoms and lost them again. And though some were scattered beyond memory, their names have never vanished. From covenant to nation, the covenant was the beginning. God's promise to Abraham land descendants and blessing was carried forward through Isaac and Jacob. Jacob's 12 sons became the pillars of a people. Their names: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, were carved into the memory of Israel like stars into the night sky. Each tribe bore its own destiny: Judah the lion, Levi the priest, Joseph the fruitful branch, Benjamin the fierce warrior. Together they formed the nation of Israel, bound not only by blood, but by faith, the promised land. Their journey through wilderness led them into Canaan, the land promised to their fathers. There they built homes, fields, and cities. They fought enemies and carved out a place between the empires of Egypt and Mesopotamia. For a time under David and Solomon they shone like a light among nations. Jerusalem stood as their heart, the temple, as their soul. Yet even in their golden age division stirred. After Solomon the kingdom broke into two: Israel in the north, Judah in the south. The dream of unity faltered. Exile and loss. The northern tribes fell to Assyria in 722 BC. 10 tribes were carried away, their voices fading into legend as the 10 lost tribes. The southern kingdom endured until Babylon's armies came in 586 BC. Jerusalem was burned, the temple destroyed, and the people marched into exile, but exile did not erase them. In Babylon, prophets spoke of hope. In Persia, Cyrus opened the way home. The Jews returned, rebuilt their temple, and carried forward the covenant. Though diminished in number, they endured when empires around them rose and crumbled into dust. The mystery that remains. Of the 12 tribes, 3, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, continued through history, becoming the Jewish people known today. The other 10 remain shrouded in mystery. Were they absorbed into other nations? Do fragments of their memory still live in distant communities across Asia or Africa? Or are they truly lost, waiting only in prophecy to be revealed at the end of days?
Legends abound, but certainty slips away. The mystery itself became part of their legacy, a story that invites both faith and wonder, lessons of the tribes. The story of the 12 tribes is not only about ancient names and forgotten lands, it is about resilience. It is about the power of memory and identity. For though they faced conquest, scattering, and exile, the people of Israel never let go of who they were. They carried their story in scrolls and songs, in prayers, whispered in foreign lands, in names spoken at the Sabbath table. And because they remembered, the tribes are remembered still. An end that is not an end. So here as the story closes, imagine the land of Canaan under the setting sun. The hills glow gold, the Jordan shimmers, and the ruins of old kingdoms lie silent beneath the earth. Yet if you listen closely, you can almost hear the voices of the tribes, shepherds calling across the valleys, psalms rising from Jerusalem, prophets crying out in the streets.
Their kingdoms may have fallen, their people may have been scattered, but their story endures. For history is not only stone and sword, it is memory, it is faith, it is hope carried from one generation to the next. Reflection at nightfall. Now as you rest, let the journey of the tribes settle into your mind like a gentle lullaby, from Abraham's first steps to Jacob's blessings, from Egypt to the promised land, from the glory of David to the sorrow of exile. You have walked with them through centuries. The 12 tribes of Israel are both history and legend, both people and symbol. Some are remembered clearly, others are lost in mystery. But together they remind us that even when nations fall, stories endure. And in those stories the past still whispers, calling us to remember. Close your eyes and let the names drift softly, one last time. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. They are gone, yet not gone.
Lost yet still found in memory, and perhaps somewhere their descendants still walk among us carrying the promise of an ancient covenant.